the gender health gap basically exists because it wasn't until 1994 that it became mandatory for women to be included in clinical trials. And it wasn't until 2014 that the animals that were used in animal trials were actually also not just male animals, but female animals. And I recently did a presentation about this to very, very senior people in an insurance company. And they were like, this is not true. You're kind of lying. And I said, no, this is really true. And they were like, no, this can't be true. You know, we've been in this business for so long. We should know that this is the case. So I think from the bottom up, doing education about how big this problem, as Sophie mentioned, is, but also the enormous opportunity, both commercially as well as kind of in cost saving. If we just make it this equal, we're not saying the future is female. No, it's about creating a future where the healthcare for both men and women is equal.
Hey, welcome back to Women Disrupting Tech, and thank you for tuning in to episode 159. My name is Dirk-Jan Epkes, and this is the podcast that closes the funding gap in venture capital by amplifying the stories of female founders and their investors. What does it take to close the gender health gap, and how do we ensure that closing it doesn't take more than a century? To discuss these questions, I'm joined by Maaike Steinebach and Sophie van Dijk. Maaike Steinebach and Sophie van Dijk are the co-founders of FemTech NL, the organization that connects more than 90 FemTech companies across the Netherlands. In this episode, Maaike, Sophie and I talk about why collaboration is key to closing the gender health gap and what it actually takes to align a fragmented landscape. By listening, you'll learn how ecosystem fragmentation hinders progress in FemTech and how more collaboration could help close the gender health gap, what advice Maaike and Sophie give FemTech founders pitching to investors who don't share their lived experience, and what FemTech can learn from FinTech, an industry that took years to move from competing with banks to working with them. Plus, you'll hear why Maaike compares running FemTech NL to being a dog walker. So when you're ready to discover how we can move from fragmentation to collaboration in FemTech, here's my conversation with Maaike Steinebach and Sophie van Dijk. Maaike Steinebach, Sophie van Dijk from FemTech NL. Welcome to Women Disrupting Tech. Good to have you both. Maaike, let's start with some background on you. How did you get into your current role as co-founder of FemTech NL?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dirk-Jan, for having me today. So I have a very long background in financial services and tech. I'm a mother of 3 children, and I have spent my whole career basically trying to get more women into senior management roles. And when I turned 40, I realized I was very lucky because I had a lot of support from a lot of male colleagues around me. I moved from Amsterdam to London to Singapore to China and later to Hong Kong. In 2018, I was on garden leave and in between 2 roles, and I realized that there was such a thing like FemTech. And I thought, wow, that would be a game changer for me because I'm a mother, I'm a partner, I'm a lover. I put myself at the bottom of the Maslow curve when it comes to my health and well-being. So how amazing would it be if there would be technology that I can do and take care of my health, my mammogram, my pap smear, my other health issues at home? I thought it would really democratize the health and well-being of women. But then I was starting to write about it, and I got a lot of pushback from women, particularly on LinkedIn. Like, we don't need technology for us. We have a lot of labels already. And I was a little bit taken aback. So I joined Visa as the CEO for Hong Kong and Macau. And I realized during COVID that my interest for FemTech and women's health was really spiked in such a way that I wanted to pursue this as a career. So in 2023, I resigned. I set up my own company, FemTech Future, to use my corporate voice and my corporate credibility to support startups with their business development, strategy, and fundraising, because there was so much stigma and taboo on this topic. And then through LinkedIn, I connected with Sophie, and Sophie will do her own introductions, but together we got really excited to collaborate and set up originally the Women's Health Innovation Council, but subsequently realized that there was also no ecosystem in the Netherlands around femtech startups, and that's when we said, let's set up FemTech NL together.
Okay.
So that's a little bit of my background.
Thank you. I want to double click on one thing later, but let's first go to Sophie.
Yes, so like Maaike, I had a corporate career. I spent my first 10 years of my career actually with Shell Oil in all countries where basically where you don't go on holiday. So I worked in Nigeria and I worked for a very long time in Iraq as well. Whilst living and working in Dubai in the Middle East, and I wanted to do an INSEAD Executive MBA because I wanted to have more impact in my career. So actually after my Executive MBA, I moved into MedTech in several roles. And then in one of the roles, I was working for Antler or coaching at Antler. And I met this amazing startup, Floria, and I became involved with them. And actually through advising them and supporting them, I actually learned about the gender health gap. And I thought, no, I really want to focus on this in my career because this is actually where you can make so much impact. And, once you see it, you can't really unsee it. So I was looking around for opportunities. Like I said, I saw a post by Maaike on LinkedIn. I answered, we had a coffee, I think 2 weeks later. And exactly that's the start of Women's Health Innovation Council and the start of FemTech NL.
Okay, cool. So, Maaike, one thing you said that I wanted to touch on. You said you got a lot of pushback from women on the technology aspect. Why was that?
Well, this was 2018, so the term femtech had only been coined by the founders of Clue in 2016. So it was very new. It was very different, and I felt that unlike now, where globally we are talking about women's health and we are talking about femtech, at that time, nobody was talking about it. And I really felt that there were a lot of women that were genuinely worried that we were going to start talking about women's health in the workplace. They were coming to me and say, please don't go and talk about menopause. We already have so many issues in our careers. We already have so many labels. We really worry that if we now start to talk about all these personal issues in the workplace, that will affect our career opportunities and our abilities to kind of grow into leadership roles. And secondly, so I thought that was very interesting. So I think women were generally worried that if we were going to talk about their issues about women's health in the workplace, that there would be consequences for them. On the other hand, I also felt that at the time FinTech was very popular. People started to talk about property technology. There were all these things coming up, and that there was a little bit like oh no, let's also not do something that sounds very kind of popular, and let's do FemTech. So I think there was a bit of pushback just in general on all these new fads of technology coming out, and then from women that were genuinely worried about how this would impact their career life if we were going to talk about women's health in the workplace.
How did that make you? How did that make you feel?
Oh, I was very surprised because I thought this is this would be an amazing way to democratize the health and well-being of women. Because I looked at myself as a CEO, a mother of 3. I had to take care of my children, my employees, my partner, my family, my friends. And I was literally at the bottom of that Maslow curve. And but as women, we have so many more kind of checkups that we mandatorily need to do throughout our lives, that I thought, wow, if I can do a mammogram at home at 11 p.m. when all the kids are in bed and I finally have some downtime, that would be amazing. Or if I can do my pap smear at home, I don't have to take time off. So for me, I thought this is like an amazing innovation that every woman should be able to benefit from. But I think due to the lack of knowledge and the stigma and the taboo, which is thankfully slowly changing, but at that time it was so deeply ingrained that it created a lot of resentment from other women.
Okay, yeah. And Sophie, you worked at Antler, and there you met Floria. What in the story of Floria made you tick?
So I wasn't working for Antler. I was coaching at Antler, just to rectify that. To be honest, just everything. I know that sounds a bit broad, but the proposition, the fact that you actually can speak to doctors that are, have a proper medical background, but are also interested in integrated health. I think that was for me an eye opener as well, because a lot of the times in the Dutch healthcare system, we focus on one silo only. And what I really loved about Floria's proposition is actually they would put the silos together. And I don't think they like me using this term, but actually I like the idea of a project manager for your personal health. So that doesn't only look at, only your gynecological aspects or only your mental. No, that puts everything together. And I think that holistic approach really appealed to me. Then secondly, I have been interested already in telehealth. Actually, throughout Corona, I was really looking into possibility of telehealth because, access to doctors wasn't really possible or wasn't as convenient during Corona, and it was very challenging. So
Yeah.
telehealth, I've been very interested in as well. So that came together with Floria, and then I learned about the gender health gap more and more, and I thought, okay, something needs to be done. And I really, really want to be involved with this. And then once you start looking and discovering all these amazing startups and innovations, it becomes a super exciting space, because every day we see new technology globally, new innovations. And I'm like, I want to be part of this. This is an evolution, and it is really exciting.
So today we're going to talk, one of the topics that we're going to talk about besides FemTech, of course, is the level of fragmentation and the lack of collaboration, because Floria is a startup in the Dutch ecosystem, but there's a couple more.
Not just a couple.
a lot more. So I was wondering, what was the moment that you sort of clicked on, hey, we need more collaboration in that ecosystem to make progress?
What was really interesting is I was working predominantly in Asia and Sophie was working in Europe, but we were both interested also in the Middle East. And I was talking to Sophie about some of the innovation I was seeing. So I gave her the example of a company in Hong Kong that has developed a menstrual pad that you can use to test for HPV. So women in Asia typically don't use tampons. They don't like injectables. So pads are a very common way to use during your period. But she had seen in the UK that there was a UK company that had a similar kind of test, but with tampons. And we were like, this is really crazy, because if we could bring these two companies together, then they could possibly scale much faster, both geographically in Asia and other markets, but they could also double their product range if they had both tampons and pads. So that is why we initially founded the Women's Health Innovation Council, because we wanted to bring together innovation and innovators. And we realized that actually a lot of innovation in women's health happens in isolation. So these amazing scientists and research sit in their lab in a city, in a country, and uh, probably don't very often know who else is working on this or have access to this kind of visibility. So we wanted to bridge this gap by connecting innovators globally. Now, what was interesting is that I had been running the FemTech community informally in Hong Kong, and I was part of an organization called FemTech Across Borders, which was trying to unite all the FemTech initiatives around the world in one place.
Mm-hmm.
And then we realized, like, okay, we are now talking about connecting innovators in Asia with the Middle East and Europe. But what about connecting the Dutch ecosystem? Because we were kind of scratching our heads, and apart from Floria and maybe one or two others, we were like, what do we really know about the Dutch ecosystem, and who is doing what, and where are people collaborating? And that insight led us to establish FemTech NL, with the idea to create more connection between all the different femtech startups in the Dutch ecosystem,
Mm-hmm.
but also connecting them with researchers, with universities, with hospitals, with corporates, with investors, with all the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. But it was really as we were going through and sharing which femtech companies we knew, that we realized, wow, this is really crazy that there is so much fragmentation and people are not really working together as much as they could to have a much better impact.
Yeah. So is the goal then of FemTech NL to foster that collaboration and to really bring, let's say, parties together throughout the ecosystem?
Yeah, so we have two goals. So the first one is bringing the founders together.
Mm-hmm.
So at the moment, the ecosystem in the Netherlands that we have recently mapped in an ecosystem map has around 90 plus femtech companies in the ecosystem. And we have onboarded probably around 60 of those into the FemTech NL community, but it keeps growing because people keep on like, hey, have you met this person or have you met that person? So number one is bringing all the founders together,
Mm-hmm.
but secondly is also amplifying the voice of FemTech. So in 2018, when I started to talk about it, people had no idea what FemTech was.
Mm-hmm.
Now we are seeing globally a much better understanding of femtech, but still we need to accelerate that process of closing the gender health gap that Sophie spoke about earlier. And by representing and advocating for femtech companies in the Netherlands, whilst also acting as a catalyst to accelerate closing that gender health gap. So twofold how we are trying to grow and build the FemTech NL presence in the Netherlands.
Yeah. Yeah. So bringing founders together and also creating visibility and buzz, let's say, around the
Correct.
topic.
Correct.
Okay. I think you do that across 5 pillars. Maybe walk us through the 5 pillars and also why these 5 pillars are there and why they matter.
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about the background of those 5 pillars. When Maaike and I started working on FemTech NL, we actually we were discussing the national fragmentation, so not the global fragmentation, but the national fragmentation with the institutions. So we thought, how amazing would it be to have all the stakeholders in one room to have a discussion on what's actually missing and what are the opportunities. And so what we did, we invited about 25 change makers in the Dutch women's health landscape to attend the event. And these were investors, some startup founders, NGOs, universities, doctors, and corporates. So we invited all of these amazing change makers and we looked at the landscape and we thought, okay, what do we need to focus on? And we had a whole workshop, and basically these 5 pillars that we needed to work on, or work streams, will be the basis of our work going forward in FemTech NL. So these pillars are communication and awareness, we need to focus on raising awareness because women's health is not a women's issue, but it's a societal issue. So increasing awareness and actually normalizing the conversation that Maaike touched upon a bit earlier is critical to progress. The second pillar is data. There's really a need for unified women's health data that is accessible for startups, but also for companies, interoperable, and it's not fragmented across systems as it is now. There's an amazing initiative that's called FemHealth Data from the UMCG at the moment that's working on actually capturing women's health data on a lifetime. The third pillar is ecosystem collaboration. We talked a lot about the fragmentation already of the ecosystem, but we really believe that stronger collaboration between the stakeholder will drive real impact. The other one, the fourth one, is obviously research. I think it's been in the news a lot, and there's a lot of momentum around the research, which is great because there needs to be more investment in women's health. Both for female-specific conditions, but also gender-sensitive approaches in healthcare. And then the last one, the fifth pillar, is, of course, funding. Women's health remains underfunded. And what we actually saw from a survey that we've done, that most of the startups in our network or in our ecosystem, they struggle with actually getting funding. And so we focus on that one as well, because we need more funding to actually close the gender health gap. And FemTech is in the right position to do that because it works on all levels.
So, back to the fragmentation for a minute. There's a lot of fragmentation. I was actually surprised by the number of FemTech startups, 90 plus.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I know maybe 10% of them. But what the fragmentation, what does that look like in practice? That you gave an example, Mike, of a company in Hong Kong and a company in the UK working on essentially the same problem, but with a different solution, which if they cross-pollinate, then that would obviously double the market or probably expand the market by a lot more. What other examples are there?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, just coming back to your earlier questions about, or your surprise about the 90 plus companies.
Yeah.
What I think is really interesting is that when you think of FemTech, we talk about technology, products and services that support the health and well-being of women. But within that, you can actually talk about very low kind of tech and very high tech, deep tech. So this can be anything from digital health to wearables to medtech to biotech. So in its own right, that is already a fragmentation because a biotech company is very different, obviously, from a digital health company. So what we are seeing is across those 90 companies, a complete range of all the different variations of women's health startups. So that is how we also didn't realize actually there was such a big ecosystem in the Netherlands. Secondly, they're spread through the whole country. So they're in the north or in the south. You would typically expect that they might be in the west, in the bigger cities, but actually there's quite a few that are being incubated and developed in Brabant and Limburg, and then some that are in the north, which is really, really interesting. And some of them start because a founder has an amazing idea that they want to bring to life. But a lot of them also start from research that is being commercialized. So there are so many different ways to enter the ecosystem that already creates fragmentation. And then when you look at the other stakeholders, you look at the healthcare providers, you look at the insurance companies, you look at the corporates, a lot of these companies are doing something in their own right. So there are insurance companies that are actually backing startups. There are healthcare providers like the Erasmus or the UMC that are doing their own innovation as well. But it all happens in silos.
Yeah.
So that means that there are so many underutilized collaboration opportunities. And because of that lack of collaboration and that fragmentation, you also see a very slow translation of innovation into real world impact. So if startups and insurers would be like, woohoo, we would love to work with these startups, and there would be a pathway in which a startup could connect with an insurance company or with a corporate or with a research project or vice versa, we would have we would have a lot of innovation reaching women much quicker. But unfortunately, because it's fragmented, it's taking a lot of time, and that's why we hope FemTech NL can make a difference into being that connector of that ecosystem.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is it also part of the stage that we're at? Because there's still, it's sorry to say, but it's a relatively young
Yeah,
topic
yeah.
compared to men's health, which has been around for well, however long. Um, is that also influencing the level of fragmentation? So is it something that would come together over time and that you're trying to speed up?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it is. So as I mentioned, 2016 was when when the term femtech was first coined. Most of the companies are less than 10 years old. It's a very young industry. I studied economics, and I actually remember from my studies how an industry forms.
Mhm.
And of course, you have a lot of fragmentation. So ideally, you would hope that these players would find each other naturally. But I do think because the gender health gap, closing the gender health gap would take 175 years at
Uh-huh.
minimum, that if we don't use innovation or we don't use femtech, it's just going to take too long. So in order to accelerate that, we are using FemTech NL as a vehicle to kind of bring these parties together much quicker.
Sophie, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add with the fragmentation. So, as Maaike said, it's really about finding pathways for startups to develop quicker and build their companies quicker. But there is also a lot of inefficiencies in the system when it comes down to very basic things. Like, for example, it would be amazing if there's like a model contract library, or it would be amazing if startups would know who to ask what questions, because all of those inefficiencies takes a lot of time, and that time is not spent on actually building the company. No, it's finding out who's the best lawyer, what's the best contract,
Yeah.
what's the best accelerator, what's the best incubator, what term sheet, how do I write a term sheet. So I think removing a lot of that inefficiency that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy is best to use for founders to actually build their startups. In addition, a lot of startups in femtech are currently working on raising awareness, societal awareness. And I believe that, and it's great that they're doing it because it's for to have societal impact, and it's very
Mhm.
noble. But I think it would be amazing if the startups could more focus on their products and be less involved in raising this societal awareness and focus just on building the product as good as it can be and building it for women. So what does the customer want? And I think that's really also an inefficiency in the system.
Yeah, is that true though? Because to some extent, I think a startup founder is always or almost always solving a societal problem, which comes with a bit of education. And then the communication part about that problem is in fact a way to build a brand and build a position where they can actually talk from a position of authority. So yes, there needs to be more, let's say, cohesive communication, I would say, but I think the founders have a role in that.
They do, Dirk-Jan, and I fully agree with that. But I think I believe it would be better to focus more sometimes on building the product versus working on raising awareness in the community or in society. So yes, raising awareness is important because you want to sketch the problem, the
Mhm.
challenge, and then come up with a solution. But for femtech, there needs to be more awareness than it's not a very small problem. We're talking about a gender health gap. It's a societal problem. It's an economic problem. You cannot expect one founder to raise awareness on the whole of the problem. So I think it's best or better for NGO, or we will need to work together with NGOs, with corporates, with governments to actually raise this societal awareness. And this should not be the responsibility of the founder themselves only.
No, sorry, then we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Not only the founders, indeed. I think
Exactly.
that there's a role for organizations like FemTech NL and NGOs, and also the government for that matter. So one of the topics that has sort of an interplay with the, let's say, lack of attention for FemTech is funding. Besides that, there's a gender health gap. There's also a gender funding gap, and actually the numbers are remarkably similar, because I saw that from all the money that is invested in healthcare startups, only 2% goes to female founders or to FemTech solutions. How is the fragmentation influenced by that funding, or the other way around?
Yeah, so the numbers are shocking, although they vary a bit, but they are single digits. So single digits go into research for women, into female-founded startups, into FemTech. And I think fragmentation definitely makes it harder, because as you were talking about earlier, there are a lot of players in this ecosystem. So we have the startups, the corporates, the investors, the clinicians, the government, and the investors are really, really key here. But firstly, I think the problem is what I explained earlier, the definition of femtech. So investors are most likely very focused either on a geography or on a specific subset of the sector. So they may be doing biotech, or they may be doing medtech, or they may be doing digital health, or they may be doing scale ups. The whole industry is so young, as we just spoke about, that apart from the fact that a lot of the investors are fragmented, there is also a different focus from investors. Some really look at the commercial opportunity, as women's health being one of the fastest growing areas of innovation, but also investors look at this as social impact, philanthropy, sustainability goals. So that's number two. Number three, the problem is, because it's a young industry, there are only a handful of unicorns globally. And also, femtech is not widely covered by a PitchBook or TechCrunch, or even investor analyst, because the amount of companies that are unicorns or going through Series A, B, C is significantly smaller than the amount of companies that are still in pre-seed and early stage funding. So I would say the investor landscape is extremely fragmented, so that also makes it very hard for a startup to find exactly where to go. And then when they have found an investor that might be interested in femtech or women's health, the challenge is also that they quite often find somebody that writes the check that is still male. And that makes it very hard to explain a topic about endometriosis or polycystic ovaries or osteoporosis to somebody that doesn't have that lived experience. And that is really, really creating issues in the women's health space, which would be very different than another area of tech where men feel that they can relate to the problem much better, like fintech.
Yeah.
So that's the fragmentation of the investor focus, the fact that a lot of investors are male, and the fact that it's very hard for startups to figure out which investor does what in which country
Yeah.
makes this a very big problem at the moment.
Yeah, particularly the fact that it's hard to find the right investor. That is something that I found also through my own research on the podcast, and also doing validation for the app that I'm building. So that problem I do recognize. I want to just give you an insight I got from a conversation with Carmen van Vilsteren.
Yeah.
And she gave an example when we spoke of a male founder who literally told her, Carmen, I've stopped labeling this FemTech because then I get labeled in the wrong area.
Mm,
People stop seeing it as an opportunity and start seeing it as a niche
mm,
or philanthropy.
mm.
How do you look at that, and most importantly, how do we get out of that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of debate on this topic in the organization I mentioned earlier, the FemTech Across Borders. So these are 78 organizations from different countries. So FemTech Mexico, FemTech Spain, FemTech Asia, and this community represents about 250,000 people. So this is a very big community, and we have a big debate about this topic. So if we before we used the term femtech, basically a lot of medtech and biotech, maybe less digital health and wearables, but a lot of biotech and medtech that was focused on fertility or on female oncology was never looked at specifically through a women's health lens. It was just like, this is an oncology problem or this is a fertility problem. But now that we know so much more about the gender health gap, and now that we know, all of a sudden, there are now labels on so many more conditions that are specific to women or disproportionately affect women. We feel that it's really, really necessary to create this awareness for firstly the problem, but second also for the solution that is there. So could the life of some startups be easier if they are not labeled femtech? Yes, probably. And I speak to quite a few founders and I'm like, listen, just change your language depending on what kind of investor or counterpart you're talking to. That is totally fine. But I think to just create awareness to what Sophie mentioned, the societal problem that is the lack of equality in healthcare between men and women, we need to continue to use the term femtech. And if I could have a magic wand, I would love it that we don't have to use it in the next few years. But for now, just to create the awareness, to show what we're building and why this needs to be built, I think we collectively feel that we need to continue to use the term femtech for now.
Okay. Yeah. So and until everyone has been enlightened to understand that there's women's health too.
Yes, and when
Yeah.
when femtech becomes as normal as fintech.
Yeah, talk to me about that because no, let me first ask a different question. There's also a disconnect between investors and corporates in the femtech space. So not only is it difficult to find the right investor, but it's also difficult to find the right corporate for your solution. So what is happening there? What is going wrong there?
Well, when I first started this, and Sophie, please jump in, but when I first started this, I thought, oh my God, these solutions are amazing. Women would benefit from this so much. We can democratize the healthcare system. When we look at where women spend most of their time in poor health, it is between the ages of 18 to 55, which is in the workplace. So this should be a no-brainer, right? There are these amazing companies that are bringing all these solutions to corporates. And when I started doing this, I basically got a blank stare from the corporates. They were like, what do you mean? We already have employee benefits. We give pregnancy leave, we provide maternity leave, we give support for parental leave, for father leave. So they were blissfully ignorant, I would say, of
Mm.
some of the challenges that women faced in the workplace. And where I thought this would be such an easy sell, just adding on to the employee benefit and sharing kind of more about the opportunities to support women in the workplace, actually was completely the opposite. What was also interesting is that an HR manager, which would be the typical entry point of a women's health startup, and you could argue whether that should be the chief technology officer or the IT department or the DEI department or HR, but just through experience, the entry point is quite often HR.
Yeah.
An HR manager is taking care of recruitment, employee retention, performance, bonus. And then all of a sudden, there was somebody that was coming to them and was saying, well, now the part of your role is also to start talking about menopause, or to start talking about menstrual health, or
Mm.
to start thinking about providing free period care. And I found it was completely overwhelming. So what we had to do, and what I think a lot of startup founders are doing, and that was where we spoke about earlier, is we need to create so much more awareness about how big the problem is. Because again, a lot of people in general look at women's health as reproductive health. That's it. And that's the problem women have. But now that we are talking about so many more issues that previously were held private, were not very well known, even to women, that they were having problems, were something that, generations were saying, don't talk about it, just, bite the
Yeah, I know.
bullet and get through it.
Yeah.
Now, as Sophie said, society is asking us to do better. Women are asking us to do better. Governments are asking us to do better. So now this has also become an issue that corporates need to address. So again, that has taken time. And thankfully, I'm now seeing more and more companies recognizing actually the benefits of taking care of women in the workplace, and are no longer just thinking or giving me a blank stare when I start to talk to them. It's still very limited to what I would call the easier bits, so which would be menopause, which would be fertility of an IVF journey. I still think a lot of corporates struggle with talking about menstruation in the workplace, talking about sexual health and wellness. So there are still a bit of safe topics which globally are getting more attraction, versus you're not going to talk about incontinence or pelvic health or sexual wellness in the workplace, but hopefully over time that will come as well. And again, not just talking about this just for women, but being able to talk about this for everyone in the workplace,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so I'd like to add a little bit in terms of data, and I think that's really important to back this up and to see the trend. TNO has done an amazing study actually to see how women's health actually decreases women's productivity in the workforce. And I think that's a great selling point, is really the productivity. So what the TNO study said is that 80% of working women experience hormone-related complaints linked to menstruation, pregnancy, or menopause that actually impacts their work performance.
Mhm.
So that affects approximately 3.2 million women in the Netherlands. So that's a huge impact on productivity. So it's a societal problem, but also an economic problem, which then can be translated into the workforce. The other data, which I thought was very interesting, that's actually study done by Women Inc., is actually that the society as a whole can save 7.6 billion per year, per annum, when we focus on female diseases, on actually 4 areas: endometriosis, menopause, common mental health conditions in women, and cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible savings actually by focusing on women's health.
Yeah.
So corporates should be aware of it. Society should be aware of it because it does have an economic impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's the famous McKinsey, or now famous McKinsey study that says it's globally, I think it's a $1 trillion per year
Opportunity.
to the addition to the global GDP, which
Yeah.
is about, I think, 12.5% growth per year. If we solve for this,
Yes,
a lot of that, I think, goes into indeed productivity, indeed. So actually, this is also benefiting men.
absolutely.
I think personally, looking from it from my perspective, what I see a lot is that men are thinking about women's health like, yeah, that's not my problem,
Yeah,
which I think is a huge mistake because it impacts their wallets directly. It impacts their, in terms of both productivity if you're an investor or company owner, but also in higher healthcare premiums.
yes,
Yeah.
Because we cannot distinguish between
Yeah.
men and women. But it also impacts them in terms of their own mental health, their own surroundings. It's
Correct.
their wife, their mother. Not everyone
absolutely.
has a wife. Not every man has a wife. But every person on this planet
Yeah.
has a mother. So
Exactly.
And Dirk-Jan, what is really interesting is that basically, women are kind of core in a lot of families globally. Keeping your women happy, healthy in a family makes healthy communities, make healthy cities, make healthy countries. And if you look directly, so for every dollar you spend on women's health, it generates $3 in GDP. And if you look at the global kind of index and correlation between countries with the lowest GDP, they also have the worst track record in taking care of their women. There is
yeah,
a direct correlation there as well. And that makes it so interesting. So that makes it not just a problem for startups or corporates or insurers or investors, but also very much for governments. They are a key player. And I think sometimes when Sophie and I talk about this, it's like we are not just helping one part of the ecosystem, but in order to advance this, we feel like dog walkers. I feel like dog walkers, and I have like a startup. I have a startup puppy. I have a government puppy. I have an investor, a health care provider, an insurer, and I need all of them. We need all of them to walk into the same direction, because the
yeah,
moment one starts to pull in a different direction, all the others get pulled there too.
yeah.
And really, to make this work, it needs to be a joint effort.
I
I'm
love
going
that.
to make a picture of all the different dogs, Maaike.
Yes,
Yeah,
Now
exactly.
imagining what would be the Ministry of Health, what would it be, what kind of dog, what kind of breed would be the Ministry of Economic Affairs. Anyways, I find it very funny.
yeah,
Who's the German Shepherd? I'll be the German Shepherd. Anyways, the thing what I think I'd like to emphasize as well is that this issue should not be only with the Ministry of Health. It's an economic issue, and hence we really believe it should be with the Ministry of Economic Affairs as well. Because it is about productivity, it is about workplace, and yes, of course, they need to work together. And I think from the highest levels in the government, if the gender health gap and women's health will be focused on by both Ministry of Health and Ministry of Economic Affairs, we think that collaboration would trickle down into the Dutch landscape and would really help with the fragmentation. Actually, with the
the
defragmenting.
fragmentation of
Yes.
of the landscape. Yeah, I
Yes,
think there's a key partner there, another key partner on the government level, the Ministry of Finance, because part of this needs to come from tax,
Yeah.
from taxation restructuring.
Yeah, and I think at this stage of women's health, a lot of the startups actually depend on investments by family and friends and
Yeah.
business angels, and because everyone is so early stage. So you're right, it would be amazing if those kind of investment would be tax deductible, and if they were be accommodated by the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah. So that takes awareness also on that level. What is missing in the awareness part of it? of the landscape?
So I think at the moment, what is missing predominantly is data. What Sophie just mentioned, so TNO did some really good research. There is a lot of research happening in the different university labs as well. But I think there's never been like a health survey or data collection on a Dutch level to understand exactly how big certain problems are. So there's amazing reporting happening from McKinsey and PwC and all the big consultants, but none of them have drilled down into the Netherlands. So in order to really create more awareness and use these numbers, we are using global numbers. But it could very well be that women in the Netherlands have way more endometriosis than above average, or we know for sure that all women, will go through menopause at some stage. But do we know exactly how many women they are? We are assuming 3.2 million women in the Netherlands are going through menopause. So I think what would really, really help is if we had much more data on a national level to understand exactly how big is the problem for the Netherlands. And then we can align the problem with the solutions, with the research, with the startups. Where do we need to allocate money? Does that come from corporates? Does it come from investors? Does it come from the government? Does it come from the healthcare system itself? Because now we are all doing amazing work, but it's all happening still in silos. And I think the data would really be the glue, because then we can also really come up with a more collaborative way of communicating and creating more awareness about how big the problem actually is.
Yeah. So what is the role of men in fostering collaboration, you think?
So the role of men, I think it all starts with this communication and awareness. So being aware of what the situation is and understanding the gender health gap, understanding how this impacts actually women's livelihood. I think that it starts with that. Unfortunately, as Maaike was saying, most men pay the bills or write the checks. And I think that's still the case in terms of, who's deciding on what investment to make. So I think it starts with communication and awareness. And then hopefully by having this awareness of the problem and also of the enormous positive impact it could have on society and the benefits for everyone, hopefully by being aware of that, they'll start writing the checks for the right companies, the FemTech companies.
Yeah.
And I think just to add a little bit more to that, I think we spoke earlier, or I spoke earlier about the lived experience. And what is interesting is, well, thankfully there are now a lot more ways that men can use this lived experience. So they can wear period pain simulators. They can wear a meno vest where men can actually experience what it's like to have a hot flush. So trying to create more of that lived experience on the one hand, but on the other hand, also really working in tandem to try and how do I explain this?
Do you think women's health should be part of the biology classes that we teach on in high school?
Oh, for sure. That's a no-brainer, Dirk-Jan, and it should be featured more in the medical university. I mean, it all goes back to, to primary school, high school, for sure.
Yeah, at the moment, I think the both the biology, kind of sexual health education, even medical training, has very little focus on women's health, and I thankfully there are a lot of doctors globally working on this specific topic to make sure that the knowledge at medical schools is also elevated. In Singapore, for example, there's a great example of once you're done with medical school, there's a 1-year specific add-on on women's health, because in the existing curriculum, there's only about 3 to 4 weeks specific to women's health.
Yeah, in the Netherlands it's one.
Okay, it's one. And what is interesting is also that a lot of the medical books are outdated. So, for example, when it talks about a female heart, it talks about the male heart, and then it says, well, and the anomaly to the male heart is the female heart, instead of saying there is like a male heart and it's different from a female heart. So this is extremely important to change as well, because if we don't change that, then we will never really, be able to share the message to say like, hey, men and women are very different. And what is interesting is, so the gender health gap basically exists because it wasn't until 1994 that it became mandatory for women to be included in clinical trials. And it wasn't until 2014 that a lot of animals that were used in, the animals that were used in animal trials were actually also not just male animals, but female animals. And I recently did a presentation about this to very, very senior people in an insurance company, and they were like, "This is not true. You're kind of lying." And I said, "No, no, this is really true." And they were like, "No, this can't be true. We've been in this business for so long. We should know that this is the case." So I think from the bottom up, doing education about how big this problem, as Sophie mentioned, is, but also the enormous opportunity, both commercially as well as kind of in cost saving, if we just make it this equal. We're not saying the future is female. No, it's about creating a future where the healthcare for both men and women is equal. I think has to be the messaging of us going forward.
Yeah, I was wondering, you just said something that struck me. You are holding a presentation to very senior people in an insurance company, and they are essentially saying, "Well, no, we know this for a very long time." It, is there also, especially on the men's side of this, is there also shame to be dealt with, like men feeling genuinely ashamed of, like, oh, this is like really bad, and we
Well,
feel really bad about it?
I think so, because what I do experience is a little bit what Sophie mentioned. Once people see it, both men and women, they cannot unsee it. So, what is great about this movement is that there is an accelerator, in a way that the more information we get out, the more people are going and sitting at work or at home and going, "Oh my God, I need to do something about it." So, the amount of people that we are also getting as FemTech NL that are like, "Hey, can we have a coffee? We are so fascinated by this topic. We want to do something. How can we help? How can we support?" That is growing. And I genuinely think a lot of men are also, particularly the ones that I've been speaking to, that got to step away and go like, "Oh my God, this is amazing. Why did we not know that? How can we support to make this a bigger thing?" And there are some amazing male champions within the corporate space across the globe, including in the Netherlands, that are really advocating for changes in the workplace, for changing for their partners, for their daughters, for their mothers. So yeah, I think change is happening, and men are a really, really big part of the solution as well. Yes.
Yeah, I want to add to that, Dirk Jan, and I think just to be clear, it's not just men who are not aware. It's also women in the
Mhm.
workplace, women that still need to learn a lot about their own bodies and to be aware of their own bodies. Um, so I think that's also important as a woman. Also, do your homework. How does your body work? How does your menstrual cycle work? What happened? And I think it's also about that, because without women knowing about themselves, they cannot actually transfer this knowledge to the male people in their lives as well.
Oh. No, but that's why I was also suggesting that we need to do something about the education around this, because I think that's where it starts, and it's also a way to for lack of a better word, stop the leaky bucket effect.
Yes. But I do think we are fortunate now to live in an age where we are able to aggregate more data. So we now have access, due to AI, we have access to all kind of global data and information. So
Yeah.
when you're in this space, the amount of new information that is coming out is very, very frequent, which is very exciting. But also through social media, there is also an opportunity to share more. Now, the challenge is also with social media, there's a lot of misinformation. And I have a 20-year-old daughter, and I find it shocking to see how gullible she is in picking up all this stuff. Like, oh, hey, a Kardashian is selling, a gummy that's supposed to be good for my gut. Can I try it? And I'm like, oh my God. So there's a lot of misinformation, but there's also a real opportunity for platforms to start sharing all this new information that is now coming up so quickly because of AI. We are getting so much more connectivity. That there's something really positive about what is happening today. And I hope that will create a flywheel or accelerate the awareness with everybody, basically, about health and well-being.
Yeah, I definitely hope so too. Also, that women will start using AI also for this.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
that's one of the things I took away from my conversation with Ida Tin, one of the founders of Clue, that she said one of the biggest missing parts of women's health is that we just don't know how hormones behave over time,
Correct.
and we don't have a data set on that. And once we have a data set on that is global, we can actually start developing real solutions, because then we know what happens when and how this changes from one person to the next, and if it's related to travel, like if your jet lag is influencing your how your period impacts you.
Yeah, I agree. But to be honest, whilst I love all the work that I'm doing in women's health, it's very necessary. But at the end of the day, we need to realize that we are all different. So Sophie and I are different. You are different. We all need different precision medicine. So the future is really about precision medicine, and the way to get there is personalized data and AI. But unfortunately, in order to get to precision data, we first, we are still in that phase that other people are working on precision data, whilst we are just working on basic health equity for both men and women. But the future has to be precision medicine for everybody.
How frustrating is that? Do you feel that you're behind?
No, I don't. I feel actually that there is so much momentum. I think Sophie and I were both early in this. And I'm a change maker. I like being a catalyst. So I don't mind having to do a lot of the front running work on this. But I feel globally it's getting a lot of momentum. And I'm very excited that there are people out there that are trying to figure out how we can all live better and longer. And that is called the longevity movement now. And it's getting a lot of traction as well. And it's getting a lot of focus. But for now, I feel very happy to be working with Sophie in just advancing women's health. It's a great job to have, honest.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity, Dirk-Jan, and we really want to focus on this opportunity and what we can do versus looking back at what should have been done, because we don't think that's the right way. So we believe in the opportunity and we want to continue to work on the solution as well.
Cool. What are some of the most important initiatives that you're working on right now?
So on the basis of the 5 pillars, we've established Project Athena, because we want to make lasting impact. So we really focus on things we can move forward today that has an impact, in the next years. So this year we focus on a matchmaking event end of the year to help with the fragmentation. So we'll invite universities, PhD students, and also founders for a big event mid-December. And we really hope that by doing that, it will have will be as a catalyst again. Innovation happens in isolation. We want to open that discussion up and see how we can do matchmaking between those amazing research innovations that are being done and the startup founders. So that's a big event end of this year, working together with Invest NL, Health Holland, and also TNO. The other thing that we're working on is actually an investment paper to look at the opportunities that FemTech offers in the Dutch landscape. So those are two very big work streams that we're working on. In the meanwhile, we have events coming up. We have working days, co-working days. There's one the 22nd of May. We have webinars, information sessions, and a lot of small kind of events as well.
Yeah, and those co-working days are at Equals, actually.
Yes.
That I do.
On the 22nd of May, so you're more than welcome to join, of course.
Yeah, by then this episode has not aired yet, but we'll include the version after that in the show notes and in the events list, and also the events that you are organizing in December, because I think that's really, really nice to combine forces also with Health Holland and Invest NL.
Yeah, for sure.
Also gives a bit of access to higher tiers of funding, I think, because Invest NL does not do pre-seed and seed.
Correct, but Invest NL does a lot on market development, and they're very proactive in the field of FemTech.
Yeah.
And I think if we all put our brains together and we leverage what we know from the rest of Europe, we can collectively try and find new ways of bringing a lot of these companies through what we call the valley of death. So that's the priority as well.
So before we close, I have a couple of questions from a founder perspective on how to reach better investors and how to sell your story a bit better, and also what we can learn from FinTech, because that we talked about really early on. So first question is, most investors, because they're male, because they don't have the lived experience, still don't fully understand the problem. How can founders work around that?
Well, I wouldn't say work around that. I mean, what I'm seeing is that the most successful founders are the ones that are really focusing on the commercial opportunity and that present the business case successfully. At the end of the day, every investor is looking for a business case. So that should be a priority, whether it's whether it's on women's health or any other topic. And we see the same dynamics and the same issues happening in women's health. So focus on the business case and the commercial opportunity.
Yeah, data.
Okay. So the commercial opportunity and indeed the economic benefit to the investor, because in the end that's what the investor is looking for, and the data that is already available. So for about collaboration, because one of the things that I was thinking about is like, okay, how do you do these partnerships between startups or between a startup and a corporate without losing your product or losing control over the product or brand? Any tips for that?
Yeah, so I think we need to think about partnerships. There are different ways of partnerships. So if you talk about global partnerships, it's very easy to work with someone that lives in a different geography than yourself, because you don't have any competition and you can actually help each other in your strengths and weaknesses. So for example, the example that Maaike used on the HPV, the person she actually met in China, she was a professor. She was extremely strong on R&D. The founder in the UK was very strong commercially. So that would have been a match made in heaven, even though there's completely two different continents. So I think that level of partnership is relatively straightforward and maybe more easy. Then the other kind of partnerships between startups, I think for startups, it's very important to be aware of what your USP is. So I believe if everyone is very strongly aware of their own USPs and communicate that very clearly externally, it's much easier to work together than when your USP aren't that well known, because you're still trying to look at a product market fit. So I think it's really important to be aware of it, because then you know what is a competition and what's not your competition. So I think that's also important. Then we believe, and actually this is also why Mike and I started Women's Health Innovation Council, that corporates are very good at scaling. So I think having a product market fit is essential as a startup. And then it would be amazing if you find a corporate that actually you can work together with to actually do the scaling, and a corporate that does have the financing to actually do that with the right teams. Because a lot of, the medical certification, country expanding to other countries, corporates are probably better at that and quicker than some of the startups will be because of the funding gap.
Especially in health, especially also in Europe, you need almost need a corporate partner to go across borders.
Yeah, because there's so many rules and regulations within Europe. Germany is completely different, has a different system again than the Netherlands, even though it's quite similar. And then we have France and Spain, and then you have all the regulations, you have all the country languages as well. I mean, it's quite a financial commitment to actually expanding to other European countries. And we need those pan-European FemTechs. We need those. And so working together pan-European is very important.
Yeah. So what makes a FemTech solution, quote unquote, easy to buy or easy to incorporate for a corporate or for an insurer?
Well, similar to what I just mentioned about the commercial opportunity and the business case. And in the workplace, obviously, the business case is cost reduction, increased economic productivity. So it's really about showing that business case. So Women Inc. In the Netherlands has done some research, and they basically showed that improving knowledge, diagnosis, and treatment in 4 women's health areas could generate an estimated 7.6 billion in annual societal savings in the Netherlands. So I think Sophie already mentioned endometriosis, menopause, mental health, and cardiovascular disease. So it is really about showing the business case on how an insurance company can save money on claims by doing more prevention, and how corporates can basically retain, attract talent, increase productivity, and lower costs in the workplace by focusing on prevention and support for women.
Maaike, you also compared FemTech earlier
Yeah.
to FinTech. What are lessons from FinTech that FemTech can use or apply, or founders that can apply?
Well, what's very interesting is a lot of fintech companies were set up by like disgruntled bankers that were unhappy kind of with the products and services that the existing financial services were providing.
Uh-huh.
And they thought, let us set up a company and do it better. And then when they came with their solutions to banks and to partners, the banks and the financial institutions were like, well, we've been doing this for hundreds of
Huh?
years. We don't need any innovation here. Um, and it took both partners, both startups and financial institutions, at least 5 to 7 years to understand that the future was not in competition, not even in co-opetition, which was the next phase, which was like we'll collaborate on certain things and we'll compete on other things, but that the future was really in collaboration. It was like take what is working from financial institutions, but replace what isn't working with these incredible innovative fintech startup solutions, and let's collaborate together. And the similarities I'm seeing with femtech is there are a lot of people in this community that are like, healthcare system is broken for women, we can do better. So they create these amazing opportunities which they're trying to bring to corporates or insurance or healthcare providers. But then instead of them bumping heads for another 5 years, it's like find a way in which you can leverage this innovation and build together with infrastructure that is already there. So save yourself 5 to 7 years from kind of competing or co-opetition competing, whatever you call it, and find ways to collaborate now. But it requires a bit of flexibility, because with fintech and financial institutions in the beginning, the financial institutions would say, well, we could look at this, but we would need this and this tweaked. But then the founders were very possessive and were like, no, we know the solution and we're not going to change it. And I feel something similar is happening also with FemTech. So in the partnerships that we are trying to bring together, there is still a bit of hesitance from a startup to kind of change their minimum viable product or change something about it to make it fit. And what Sophie and I are also trying to educate the startups is to say, like, hey, if you do want to collaborate, you do need to be flexible and wanting to make some changes so that it's fit for purpose for an insurance company versus a corporate, or maybe for the healthcare system. So be flexible, be open, but let the focus always be on collaboration.
And on improving the end result.
Well, eventually improving the end results for women, right?
For
Just
women,
like FinTech was successful in really changing the customer experience in financial services, collaboration in the FemTech space will lead to a better customer experience for women, either in the workplace, through an insurance product, or just through a clinical outcome. So yes, absolutely.
That sounds like a great place to move to my final question. I'm developing an AI funding coach to connect female founders and investors. From what you've learned, what should be part of the app to make it valuable for FemTech founders?
So I think it would be amazing, and it sounds very straightforward, is actually to have one platform that includes all investors in every stage in women's health. And I think that having that overview would be an amazing step forward in actually making the investor more transparent and saving a lot of time from a startup point of view, Googling what investor to speak to. So I think that would be step one, having a platform with all investors and including potentially business angels as well, because I think they play a very big role in women's health and investing in women's health. Secondly, but I'm not sure if that's the scope of your platform, as I said earlier, a lot of time is spent on finding the right lawyer, finding the right model contracts, building an economic model. And it would be so amazing to have some kind of a library that includes model contracts, model term sheets, and some kind of a business standard. Because having those sort of contracts saves a lot of time, effort, and actually just general resources for startups. So I think that would be a major step forward.
Okay, well, that sounds like a great place to start a collaboration, because until you mentioned that earlier on in our conversation, that wasn't on my radar, and then I recognized the problem, because this is the struggle that I had when I started working with procurement people. Like, okay, what's a good standard contract? How do I incorporate whatever I need from a risk perspective in there? Because when I started doing this work at ING, there was like nothing on that. So that struggle I recognize. So maybe let's collaborate on especially that part, and the landscape of investors. Actually, the goal ultimately is to link, to have that platform, so to have that insight, but also to do more one-on-one linking, like given your business case and given what you're pitching and your solution and your place in the ecosystem, you need to talk to this particular investor, because that's what one of the things that came out of my validation calls is that, like, doing investor due diligence, finding the right investor and then getting that click, and then making the right pitch, and then also making the right pitch deck. There is like so much time lost on that.
Yeah, and I think, like Maaike said earlier, the term FemTech is very broad. I mean, it's biotech, it's medtech, it's wearable. And then there's another layer of B2B, B2C, and actually finding the right investor having, done that by AI, by filling in a form, it would help you save a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
So we're looking forward to that, Dirk-Jan. When is it up?
The app is already live,
Okay.
fundingcoach.ai. You can access it already. It's literally still an MVP, and it's still in beta, so I'm still testing, and there's a couple of founders who are testing it as well. So, but fundingcoach.ai is the URL. So Sophie van Dijk, Maaike Steinebach, thank you very much for an amazing conversation. Really, really, really enjoyed this. Also, thank you for your time. If people would like to learn more about you and connect with you, or learn more about FemTech NL, where would you like to send them?
So Sophie and I are both on LinkedIn, so please connect with us personally, as well as with our FemTech NL page on LinkedIn and our website www.femtechnl.com, where we will happily add you to our community and keep you updated about our events happening in the Netherlands. So thanks so much. Thank you for having us, Dirk-Jan. We also really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thanks for being on. Listeners, thank you very much for listening. We'll include those links in the show notes, by the way. And until the next episode, as always, keep being awesome. Well, that's it. Thank you for listening to episode 159 of Women Disrupting Tech, titled From Fragmentation to Collaboration in FemTech, with Maaike Steinebach and Sophie van Dijk. Maaike, Sophie and I hope you found our conversation as inspiring and informative as we intended it to be, and if you have any questions for Maaike or Sophie, please leave them in the comment section on Spotify, YouTube and/or Apple Podcasts. I do read all the comments and I'll make sure you get an answer. If you want to connect with Sophie or Maaike or learn more about FemTech NL, please check out the links in the show notes. As usual, you can find the show notes at womendisruptingtech.blog and on my Substack via the links in the caption. There you can also find the link to the new fundingcoach.ai tool. If you found this episode useful, please take a moment to rate and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or YouTube. And if you don't follow us yet, please hit follow or subscribe so you never miss a future episode. Every week, you'll hear how another founder or investor is working to close the funding gap, one conversation at a time. Once again, thank you for listening. I hope to see you in the next episode, and until then, as always, keep being awesome.